Hey, Kim here. Today's tutorial will be for the summer Cami bodysuit. Here are all the pieces cut out, ready to go, including some snaps and the pattern, of course. So the first things first is to attach the binding to the front and back pieces. I will admit I was getting so excited to start this that I already had sewn, I think it was the front piece off camera, so you won't see me serge that onto place, but regardless, you just serge them both on. So I'm going through this part of the binding kind of quickly because I'll do it more slowly later. There's a lot of binding on this project. But basically I like to do it on a double fold. So I fold it halfway down and then fold it over again, pin it into place, and then we'll take it over to the cover stitch machine once everything is in place. So do it to both the front and the back. If you don't have a serger or a cover stitch machine, all of this can be done on a regular sewing machine. Just use like a zigzag stitch or another stretch stitch that you like, and use the zigzag to attach it and then a double needle to do the cover stitch part. And when I am using my cover stitch, I like to keep my stitches close to the seam. That's just where I like to place it. Some people like to put it down the middle. So that's up to you. Just kind of keep it as consistent as you can. Okay, so once the binding is attached to the neck and in the front and the back necklines, I'm just trimming the excess. I'll explain later why I have so much excess. But the next step is to attach the binding that goes in the armhole and creates the straps. So first you need to measure out the straps themselves. And so I like to start by finding the center of the binding. And then I knew the length of the straps, what they needed to be, and I needed to know what it was in half. So I used Siri to help me figure that out. So I needed 1.8 on either side of the center. So the total of the strap would be 3.75 inches. And so right now I'm measuring 1.8 from the center mark. I hope that makes sense. And so I found those, I matched them up. I could see that they weren't exactly even, so I just scooted one of the pins over. Then I took the other piece of binding for the other side and just laid it over top and marked the same spots. Just kind of like an easier way of doing it. And then I did go back and measure to make sure that it was correct. Anyway, then I take the binding and set it on top of the body piece right sides together and attach it to the very edge of the very top edge of the neckline, and take the other end of the strap and attach it to the back side, so one to the front, one to the back of the neck. And I checked later to make sure that the distance was correct, so that it was the 3.75 inches in distance between the two, so double check that. Next, I just pinned it to the end it's like in the center armpit part. I guess it's the arm seam, the side seam on both of those. So I had those 4 pins put in place and they look good. So we just go ahead and do the other side. And it was after I placed this one, also right sides together. There we go. So make sure that the right side is facing down. That I went back and measured just with my measuring tape to make sure that they were equal, so that one strap wasn't longer than the other. And adding in as many pins as you need is totally fine. And you're going to go ahead and serge that part all the way together. I wanted to give you a bigger view so you could see totally what it looked like, but just go ahead and serge or zigzag stitch those on. And when you do measure those straps, if they're not equal, then go ahead and shuffle it slightly so that they are the same length, because it will be important so it lays nicely on the child. And when you're happy with it, go ahead and serge it. I just did a continual serge all the way across the band so I didn't have to take it off. If you're doing like a zigzag stitch on the sewing machine, I'd say you could probably like lift the needle and just pass it through this portion. Okay, so here's the more detailed up close view of binding. I like to make sure that it was done correctly. So I was flipping it over, making sure I liked the way it looked, that everything looked even, looked good. Now that serged edge is going to go towards the center, and I'm going to fold down the top part about halfway down and then fold it over so that it's covering the serged edge. That's how I know I've pulled it far enough down, because when you are doing the top stitch, whether you're using a double needle or a cover stitch machine, you can't see the bottom very well. So I just like to make sure when I pin it in place that it's covering up that serged edge. And as you can see, I like to place my pins on the top, and it's also my way of checking to make sure that I'm folding it the same way all the way across, so that that strap or that binding is equal. It's consistent. And now for the strap itself, you're going to be folding either side into the middle to each other and then folding them in half. So have them meet in the middle and then fold it in half. And since I had stripes there, I was trying to make them match up a little bit. Mostly you want it to meet exactly in the middle, like the two ends. But if one does overlap a little bit the other, I would say let the top one slightly overlap the bottom, because you don't want the bottom part showing through when the child is wearing the garment. And I'm just going to speed up because it's the same thing over and over, but essentially meet it halfway and then flip it over. And then I occasionally was flipping it to check to make sure the entire binding was equal in size. I did like my binding and my straps to be a little bit thicker, so I let them stay that way. But if you like it thinner, you can go ahead and either cut it a little bit more narrow or roll it up a little bit tighter, whatever you want to do. Just have it be consistent. And stick as many pins in there as you need to make sure that they'll stay in place. And then you're going to take it to the cover stitch machine and go ahead and secure it in place. So as you can probably see, I have used French terry as my binding. That is not a typical type of fabric to use for binding. Most of the time people like to use like a ribbed knit, or even just like a regular cotton lycra, just something different. But the reason I ended up doing this is literally because I just liked the stripes, and I was trying to coordinate it with a pair of shorts that my daughter already has. And so because of that, I did cut my binding a little bit longer, just knowing that my French terry didn't have quite as much stretch as regular ribbing does. Okay, so once those straps are done, then go ahead and put it right sides together and sew down the sides. You can serge it. I actually first took the very top part and put it to a sewing machine and stitched it together so that I knew that the arms would match up nicely. And I only secured the top part, and then I took the rest to the serger. And we will take care of some finishing touches at the end, but the next part is to add on the snap reinforcement and just stitch that in place. I just use a straight stitch for that part, and I didn't show it because I forgot to, so sorry. But next is to attach the binding from the end of that snap reinforcement all the way around to the other end. So I started by finding the center on my binding and finding the center on the back piece. I don't know that this actually worked for me in the end, but that's what I did. And I just then attached the binding all the way around, just trying to make sure that it was slightly more tight on that bump piece that comes around. And because it was French terry once again though, I mostly left it laying flat. I didn't want to have it pull too much, just knowing that I didn't have that much stretch to work with. Also, I just want to apologize for the camera going in and out of focus all the time. Sometimes when I was working with my hands, I was too close to the lens. Didn't realize it till later. I'm working on it. I hope that I can continue to work on my camera skills. Once everything is pinned in place, then you can take it to either the serger or go do a zigzag stitch to attach it. Just be careful on the flap to take it slow, because rounded parts on sergers are always difficult. And now for more binding, just fold it halfway to meet up with the serged edge, and then fold it all the way over to cover up that serged edge. And then I like to pin it from the top, once again, to make sure that my binding is, equally wide or whatever all the way around. Okay, so here's the quick peek, zoomed out more of all of those pins that are throughout. And use even more if you feel like you need them to get, a straight, consistent binding. I think one of the keys to binding is to not overstretch it. I think when it's overstretched, it isn't consistent throughout. The thickness of it isn't consistent. I also just want to go ahead and say that my cover stitch is brand new and I've typically only ever used a double needle, and I do feel like my binding still comes out really great. The main tips that I have to share about a double needle is to lengthen your stitch. I like to do about a 3.2 to 3.5, and just take it easy and do a couple test runs on a scrap piece of fabric first. Now it is time for snaps. There's probably a lot of you that are way more like advanced in this than me. This is literally my second project ever using snaps before. So it shows to put the two of the snaps right above that that reinforcement fabric, and do one on either side in the binding itself. And hey, this was French terry, so this was really thick, and my snaps went through and had no problem. I'm using the Snap Source Snap Setter tool, and I really like it. It's great. I just want to show a close look of the snap to know which side is the right side to put facing up. The one that's this one that looks like it has little divots, that's the one that is facing up when you're attaching. So then to do the center snap is when you fold that reinforcement part over the back side, stitch it into place, and then you place the snap on top of that. Yeah. I'm sure a lot of people already know this, but that was really confusing for me and I messed it up a time or two. So the one that, in my opinion, doesn't look quite as pretty is the one that faces up. And when you're doing that fold over top, I tried to make sure that my sides were really like flat and even, and then laid them over top. I marked it with pins, and then I came in with a little pencil and marked them, removed the pin, and then I stuck the snap in there. So I kind of put the prongs into place a little bit in the fabric before I set them into the snap setter, and then you just work the magic. Also, just a little tip, I have that little sample of Corian, I think that's what it's called. It was from our countertops. I found it as something to like hammer on top of, because then it wouldn't leave any marks in my wood table. Okay, I didn't realize the focus was primarily on the top part of my machine, so I'm sorry that it's not the best angle. But the final touches, we're taking the serged edges and folding down the little tail from the serger and zigzag stitching it into the seam, and then opening up the seam after doing that on both sides, and just doing a straight stitch. Wait, let me open it up. Okay, now opening it up, laying the seam flat. I think I pushed it towards the back, and then stitching on top of the stitch that's already there, and just doing a straight stitch to set the seam and lay it flat so that it lays flat when your child's wearing it. This is the alternative to sewing binding in the round. So I did that on both sides, and those were the finishing touches, and then you are done. So aside from the miles of binding, this was a pretty simple project, right?